So Amazing Spider-Man issue number 534 is a very important comic regarding Peter Parker. And the reason why is because this really kind of gives us this internal struggle that's going on with Peter Parker. It really kind of gives us maybe this internal struggle regarding his feelings of loyalty towards Iron Man, but his hero worship of Captain America. And he's really kind of stuck in the middle and really kind of is questioning whether or not what he's doing is the right thing to do. Now, as the story unfolds, as the story begins to open up, we see that this comic book takes place after the events, after the conflict between Iron Man and Captain America and their respective teams at the chemical plant. And what we see is that Iron Man is really kind of telling his team that they are going to be transporting the captured heroes from the conflict at the chemical plant to a secure location. Now, at this point, we don't know where that location is, although we will find out later on. However, what we see is that Peter Parker is noticeably silent. He's really kind of quiet here. And when the meeting comes to an end, of course, Iron Man asks him about this. He asks him why he's being so quiet. And Peter Parker really kind of gives an ominous answer here. He says there's really nothing going on and that he understands what it is, that they're all basically just kind of following orders. And as the story continues, we really kind of see this inner monologue going on with him. We of course see that Iron Man and his team begin transporting the heroes, and that as Peter Parker, encounters various individuals as they begin to kind of leave their current location, that they are met with both supporters and protesters. And the crowd is really kind of split in half. And Peter Parker really kind of finds it weird to be called Peter Parker. He really is always addressed as Spider-Man, and so for him, it's very strange after so many years to hear people who don't know him in his personal life to refer to him as Peter. In addition, he really kind of has this personal conversation with himself where he talks about how he's on the side of law, he's on the side of the rules that have been laid down, but he just feels like this is wrong, that something just doesn't feel right about what it is that's going on. As they begin to kind of progress, of course, Peter Parker asks Iron Man why it is that he's not out in front leading everything, and he's really not scouting around and looking for potential threats later on down the line. And the reason why is, as far as Iron Man gives it, is because Peter Parker has a spider sense, and his spider sense grants him the ability to know a threat before it's coming, whereas everybody else can only react to threats once they make themselves known. Now, Peter Parker is really kind of concerned by this, and the reason why is because he's never told Iron Man that he has a spider sense. No one really knows that, except for maybe a handful of villains that he's fought, and of course Aunt May and Mary Jane. And so his concern is that Iron Man may very well be using this suit the suit that he's given him to really kind of track him, to really kind of monitor him, and to gain a lot of information on him. And so for Peter Parker, he really kind of views this as a concern that Iron Man has taken liberties that he really wasn't allowed to take. What we also see here is that Spider-Man senses Cloak and Dagger, Captain America, Daredevil, and Luke Cage tracking the crew, tracking Iron Man's group from the sewers. Now, Spider-Man doesn't in fact know that these are the individuals that are tracking them. He's just simply aware that his spider sense is going off and someone is following him. Now, of course, we see that it's Captain America, Luke Cage, Cloak and Dagger, and Daredevil, but we're really not sure what direction things are going to go at this point. Now, what we see, of course, is that Spider-Man tells Iron Man what's going on, that there are individuals following them, but Iron Man doesn't want to engage in a fight while they're transporting prisoners. And while we're not necessarily given a direct reason for this, I would go as far as to say that if there were some kind of a conflict, and for some reason those superheroes were to become released from their containment trucks, then most likely it would be a vast number of superheroes siding with Captain America against the relatively small contingent of people that Iron Man has taken with him. Now, what we see is that Iron Man makes a decision to really kind of take a backup route, and they end up on Yancy Street. Now, if you guys recall our video about the Fantastic Four, and specifically about Ben Grimm, we talked about how Yancy Street is an area of New York where it is really a large home to people who were avidly against superhuman registration. And so for the most part, Iron Man's team has really kind of gone into the lion's den here. And we really kind of see this playing out. We of course see that Captain America and his team make themselves known, and they directly combat Iron Man and Spider-Man and so on and so forth. But what we really kind of see here and something that I think is very intriguing, is a direct confrontation between Spider-Man and Captain America. Now, the confrontation isn't immediate. Captain America offers Spider-Man a chance to side with him. Of course, Spider-Man turns this down, and then he begins to fight Captain America. And this is really kind of interesting here, because we really kind of see the hero worship that Spider-Man had for Captain America for so long. We see that for the most part, Spider-Man is entirely outclassed by Captain America. Spider-Man even goes as far as to say that Captain America has knowledge in hand-to-hand combat that Spider-Man could never gain over the course of his lifetime. And Captain America is really kind of always one step ahead of everything Spider-Man does. Now, towards the end of the fight, Spider-Man begins to realize that the flaw in his fighting with Captain America is that he is fighting Captain America man to man, as opposed to fighting Captain America spider to man. Of course, we see Captain America's shield is stripped away, but shortly after this, Captain America actually bails out on the fight. He takes off. And the reason why is because he hears that his team is really kind of struggling against Iron Man's team, and so he takes off to help his friends. From there, we see Spider-Man really kind of go through this entire inner monologue, this entire inner debate, where he's really kind of discussing this with himself. He's really kind of talking about how Captain America's shield represents America. It represents the laws that we lay down. And while not every law that we like is fair, or not every law that we have to follow is right, that these are in fact the laws, and the laws do have to be followed. Now, ultimately, he leaves Captain America's shield clung to the wall, where Captain America can later come back and find it. And some of the ending lines that we see is really kind of Peter Parker again questioning whether or not he's doing the right thing, by really kind of stating that he really hopes he's on the right side. So Civil War Frontline issue number 4 continues our really kind of journey, I guess, with Sally Floyd and Ben Urich, along with Robbie Baldwin, in addition to the events that followed after the destruction of Joe's Marina. And as we begin to kind of progress through this story, we see that Ben Urich and Sally Floyd are meeting yet again at a coffee shop, and really just kind of talking about the Superhuman Registration Act and their roles as reporters and so on. But where we had previously talked about the kind of evolution where these individuals would begin taking sides, this comic really kind of brings us this instance where Sally Floyd really kind of goes full on against registration. And what's really kind of interesting here is that Ben Urich is really kind of taking the center of the road here. He's really kind of telling her that their job as reporters is not to be unobjective. It's not to take sides. Their job is to simply just report the news. Their job is to report what's there, not what they actually think is there. And Ben Urich kind of talks about how if you allow yourself to get caught up, if you're not in a position where you can kind of disassociate yourself with the events going on, then you'll really kind of go crazy. And he really kind of gives us a flashback to when the Silver Surfer first appeared in Marvel Comics. And he's talking to us about how he had been on the job for about a year or so, and he had been working in sports with regards to the Daily Bugle, and the whole reaction, the whole instance of an extraterrestrial life invading the planet Earth was just something that he couldn't handle, and he actually kind of drank himself into a stupor for about a year or so. He really kind of tries to tell Sally Floyd that her best bet here, her best role to not only, I guess, satisfy her position as a reporter, but to also keep herself safe, is to simply just report the facts. But Sally Floyd doesn't really want to hear this, and Sally Floyd is avidly against registration. She thinks it's a violation of the Constitution and so on and so forth. And so, of course, as a two-part ways, Sally really kind of makes the statement that this registration didn't just kind of appear out of nowhere. It wasn't just something that just kind of fell before Congress because they all wanted to do it, that someone somewhere set these things in motion. And if you trace the line far enough, you'll come to one person who has really kind of set all these things in motion. From there, we switch to Sally Floyd, who is again interviewing, or I guess kind of sitting in on a meeting with underground superheroes. Now, the number of superheroes that she's meeting with now have expanded to far more than they were previously. If you recall Civil War Frontline issue number 3, there were individuals like Battlestar and Typeface and Solo and a handful of others. We see now that the group has expanded by quite a bit, and the group is more or less kind of being led by a superhero named Network. Now, Network is really kind of interesting. She doesn't have any inherent abilities per se, that is to say that she doesn't have powers that are tied into her biology. The powers that she has actually comes from a suit that she wears, and she's able to intercept, I guess, network communications. She's able to intercept cell phones and all forms of data that are transmitted throughout the planet Earth, regardless of how they're transmitted. And they're really kind of talking about the fact that they want to get in touch with Captain America's team, because Captain America's team is, despite the fact that it's really kind of engaging engaging in a lot of activities, there are various superheroes out there who are forming their own underground, but don't quite know how to get in touch with it. And it's very tedious to try to do this. And the reason why is because with S.H.I.E.L.D. really kind of watching everything that everyone does, it's difficult to really kind of stick your head above the surface and look around. It's really kind of a allegory, so to speak, to World War I, where they used to say that the lifespan for anyone that stuck their head above the trench was about 8 seconds. Now, what we see as this really kind of progresses, as the story moves forward, is that someone had tipped S.H.I.E.L.D. and Iron Man's team off to this meeting that was going to take place, and they ambush all the superheroes. For the most part, a huge portion of them are captured or killed and taken away, but some of them manage to escape. Among them is Sally Floyd. And Sally Floyd is really kind of blamed for the invasion, the ambush of S.H.I.E.L.D. You know, we see Solo really kind of screaming at Sally Floyd, saying that she's the one that really tipped them off. She's the one that ratted them out. Of course, we know that, or at least we believe for the most part, that Sally Floyd was not responsible for this. Battlestar tells Gladiatrix that it's her job to make sure that Sally Floyd gets to safety. And the reason why Sally Floyd is so important here is because she is the unbiased person. She's the one person that could actually tell the story of these superheroes without having to worry about any kind of ramifications, without having to worry about any kind of incarceration, because the press is protected by the Constitution. Now, as things really kind of begin to progress, we see that 6 minutes after the ambush took place, that we kind of transition to Ben Urich. And Ben Urich is on the phone with Sally Floyd, and Sally Floyd voices her concerns that maybe somebody followed her, that maybe her phone was being tapped, that maybe something was going on that we didn't really know, or at the very least she didn't know, that she was leading people to where this meeting was going to take place with these superheroes. But what we see as we follow Ben Urich is that Ben Urich actually discovers a box, and inside this box is a pumpkin that is really kind of one of the traits, one of the most well-known aspects of the Green Goblin, Norman Osborn. And then we see that in fact the Green Goblin ambushes and confronts Ben Urich, and talks about how in previous articles that Ben Urich had written, he had really kind of told lies about the Green Goblin, and Norman Osborn wants to set these things straight. From there, we switch to Robbie Baldwin, and Robbie Baldwin is in a boxing match with Toomey. And if you recall in our discussion with Civil War Frontline issue number 3, that Robbie Baldwin had been tormented time and time again by Toomey, more so than any of the other prisoners, and it really kind of challenged Toomey as a way to establish the fact that he's not going to put up with this kind of abuse anymore. As the two of them are fighting, Robbie Baldwin is actually gaining the upper hand, because Robbie Baldwin, as the superhero Speedball, has had a lot of skill when it came to hand-to-hand combat. And so Toomey's really just kind of fighting with blind rage and using his physical strength as a means to try to topple his opponent. Robbie Baldwin has more finesse. He's really kind of more athletic here. And what we see is that some of the other inmates who have bet on Toomey to win are seeing the fight kind of going against them winning. And so one of the inmates actually cuts the leg of Robbie Baldwin with a shiv. Now we see Robbie Baldwin, kind of fall to the ground and so on and so forth. And actually Toomey steps on his leg and breaks it. But then we see that for a fleeting moment, Robbie Baldwin manifests his abilities, and the entire boxing ring is destroyed. From there, we transition to Robbie Baldwin with his mother, and his mother's visiting him in prison. And of course, his mother's really kind of in anguish here. She's angry because Robbie Baldwin will not accept any kind of admission of guilt. He will not do anything to get himself out of prison and to make amends for the actions at Stamford, Connecticut. In addition, we see that Robbie Baldwin's father simply just chose not to visit. Also, Robbie's mother is really kind of in a rough spot here. And the reason why is because, for the most part, I wouldn't go as far as to say that she's kind of being selfish here. She's really kind of in a position where she has to hear people to, talk time and time again about how Robbie Baldwin is such a horrible person, and that he was raised by horrible parents, that she, along with her husband, in addition to Robbie Baldwin, have just kind of been ostracized by society as a whole. And so she really kind of says that she's not coming back anymore, that she doesn't want to have to deal with this anymore. From there, we switch to detectives Keith and Donna. And Keith and Donna are really kind of following along the investigation that we had picked up with in Civil War Frontline issue number 3 with the destruction of Joe's Marina. And we had talked about how Joe had really kind of, disguised himself, or was disguised as a human, when in fact he was actually an Atlantean. And what's really kind of funny here is that Keith is really kind of talking to Donna and talks about how he thinks that Joe might be a Russian. And Donna really kind of thinks this is silly. She kind of really thinks this is a little ridiculous, this, but agrees to kind of bite into it and see where Keith is going with it. And what's really kind of funny here is that Keith's entire speculation falls alongside, or falls with the comic book panels as we see with Namor the Submariner. And Keith says that he thinks that Joe was a sleeper agent, that at some point along the line he had a subliminal message planted in his brain, and that the message was designed to be triggered at some point in time. Now, while he's really kind of, I guess stating this in relation to Joe being a Russian, what we actually see going on here is that Joe was an Atlantean, maybe a super spy of some kind, and that at some point a subliminal message was implanted in his brain by Namor the Submariner, and that when the message was activated, he would activate as an Atlantean to carry out whatever task it was that he was programmed to do. And as we see, as the two of them are kind of talking and they agree that it's really just kind of silly and ridiculous, we see that Joe, the Atlantean, is actually disguised as a firefighter and leaves the scene.